All right. Well, I'm Jackson Benvenutti, and I'm here with Eric Doyle. We're both North Sails One Design experts, both sail in the Etchells fleet. And we're very happy to have everyone join us here as we lead into this weekend's first West Coast series events. If you want to reach out to us, our emails are there. Feel free to send us an email. We'd be happy to help. That's what we're here for. Oh. And let's see if we can. All right. So to start off, we'll go over what happened over the winter in Miami, the Biscayne Bay Series. Then we'll catch up on the West Coast Series spring dates and those different regattas, and then go over some of our current sail inventory and tuning trip tips and tricks, especially some things Eric learned down in Miami this winter, and hopefully field some questions. You can submit some questions into the chat box, and it'll be directed towards us, and we can try to answer them as best as we can.
And maybe we remind everybody while we're waiting for a few minutes to get everybody logged in to remember to join the class, help support the class worldwide. It's easy to do at etchells.org. Go on there, join the US or whatever country you're watching from, and support your local fleet as well. I think San Diego's fleet 13, so that's what I'm a member of. But we can start with a little Biscayne Bay Series recap before we get into the thick of it. Just want to know everybody who didn't get a chance to go this year that the series is I thought maybe after the Worlds being in Miami in the spring, it would be a little bit of a smaller, less well-attended series, but there were a few people taking off, but there was a lot of turnover in the class. It's alive and well. It was really well attended. There were between 40 and 50 boats at all the events. There's still a lot of people putting in big efforts to help, to try and keep on top of the class and get better, and lots of training going on ahead of time. I sailed with a longtime mentor friend of mine, John Dane, who got up Etchells for the first time. We did all the events. That was good fun, and we just wanted to give a big congratulations to Team Lifted that's in that picture right there. That's Jim Cunningham, past president of the Etchells class. He sails with Eric Champagne, Steve Hunt, and North Sails own Serena Village, and they've won the series a few times in a row now, maybe three. And they're going to be putting in a big effort for the West Coast Spring Series too. They do pretty good. They do a big effort on that, and we're gonna see them this weekend in San Diego. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. What sails are those guys using, Eric?
They were
Lifted.
Yeah, they're using the standard North stuff. They use a PC FM main. They use the Mal jib in almost all conditions. And they use the VMG3 and the FR2 spinnaker,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then we had, I think, another North team in Craig Mincy's Freedom in third, using the LM6R, right?
Yeah, it was great to see Craig have a really good season. It was funny, we had Ed Adams coaching us, and his comment was like, everybody knows that in light medium conditions, Craig's one of the fastest guys on the race course. And yeah, he runs a little different program. He runs a LM6 when it's a little bit lighter, and if it's a little more uprange, he puts the Mal up. And he had a great season. It was great to see.
Yeah, I've done some sailing with Craig a few years ago. Great guy.
Oh, good.
Great team. Yeah. All right. This leads us to our West Coast Spring Series, which I would imagine most of the people joining us are hopefully we'll see them there this weekend. How about you go over some of these events, Eric? I'm sure you've been to many of them. I'm a newcomer to the West Coast, or at least Southern California, so I'm excited to do my first West Coast Series events.
Yeah, this weekend coming up, the Bill Bennett Memorial, after our good friend Billy Bennett, who was a past Etchells world champion, sailed with Vince Brune and Rick Merriman when they won the Worlds in San Diego. And then so next month be the Midwinters West, which is a sanctioned event, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where we have to declare sails and weigh. And then the month after, in April, the end of April, we're going to have the Pacifico Championships. And then the big grand finale, which has been around for a long time, the Mighty Orca Bowl, May 18th and 19th, which is always a very well attended event, probably the best of all of them.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Sounds fun.
Be good.
Yeah. All right. This is our, I would imagine most people have seen this tuning guide. It came out a few years ago. Fairly straightforward, pretty easy to find on the internet. Print it out, laminate it, carry it on your phone. There's probably one on every boat, I would say, at most of these events. Anything new here, Eric, with the tuning guide?
No, we've pretty much been treating that as the Bible for the starting point. We got a new boat to us this winter, and it was a boat that Benji had, 1427, and there were a few things different about it that we had to kind of sort out. And just remember that this is a really good starting point. And if you ever get lost, you kind of go back to this. It's very well done as far as rake and mast butt and things like that. But it's also remember that, every boat and every mast is just a little bit different. Pretty happy with the tensions as far as on the uppers and the lowers and shroud position and things like that. But, we found that the rake definitely varies a little bit from boat to boat. And the way we've kind of set up with the mast butt, we find a place that the boat is pretty happy at. And then we have two more positions, which are when we get to extremes. We've been pretty happy at that 80-85 rake number, or maybe we're just a little less. We're at just a little less in our boat. Instead of 80-85, we're 80-80. And if it gets really windy, we'll move it forward a little bit and maybe move the mast butt forward some, like 5 mils. And if it's going to be really, really light, one of those days like, man, I don't even know if we're going to get a race in, then we'll have a further aft rake setting and move the mast butt back a little bit, help induce some pre-bend. But other than that, on the steps and the turns on the shrouds, it's been pretty, and the lead positions and the in-hauling, it's pretty spot on. We haven't really found anything better yet. So yeah, like Jackson said, everybody should have a copy of this on their boat.
Mm-hmm. So you said you go forward 5 mil. Do you go back 5 mil as well? Is that kind of the range from your happy point?
Yeah, it has been. This boat had a whale spar, a newer whale spar. It's the first time I ever used one of those. It seems to be quite stiff. Perhaps if you had a little softer mast, maybe you'd make it bigger increments from that. But we use 5. I'm not saying people don't do more. There could be 10, but any more than 10 is a pretty drastic change.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we get into what kind of sails we've been using and keep this thing rolling, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, our
Eric,
standard mainsail, the PCFM radial head mainsail, that we've tried some little variations on it, but this is still, a great sail throughout the range is what we are still working with. As we know, we go to a big regatta, we're only allowed to declare one mainsail. This one goes through the range very nicely, 0 to 30 that we race in. That's why we changed the rig tune and the mast bend to try and keep the boat balanced and keep it powered up and keep it on its feet. we do offer another main, which is the PC Plus. It's basically the same exact sail. It's a molded sail, very smooth with a radial head. It just has a little bit more luff curve down low. Some teams prefer that, keep a little more power down low, or if they sail in a venue that's really windy most of the time and they have to use a lot of backstay. Obviously, if we put a lot of backstay on, we're bending the mast a little more, so a little more luff curve helps keep it from turning inside out very quickly. And I think the most of the sailing we do in North America is pretty light, medium. It's I'd say we did 30 days of sailing in Miami this winter, and 25 of them were less than 15 knots. So there we're keeping the mast pretty straight down low. So that's why we have a little bit less luff curve in the sail down low. It seems to work really well, and it's pretty nice in San Diego too for the conditions we see there.
Yeah, we'll touch on this a little bit more, but paying attention to where those wrinkles are in the sail can really be indicative of how much bend and where the bend is, right?
Yeah.
So that's something I'm always paying attention to. If they're down low, it's bending down low, right? Where it's a ram thing, right? And if it's up higher, it's because the backstay's been in the rig up in the middle of the mast. And we'll have some good pictures of that here in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is you on the left, right, Eric? 1427.
Right. Me
With
hiking
John
out
Dane?
to Leeward. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty
Yep.
nice comparison shot though.
Yeah. This was a good lineup off the start of a race one day, and we just wanted to kind of the biggest thing we learned on our team was that it's important when it's really light, crew is in the boat, the weight is more important to be on the low side, that we just hand the main sheet off to the skipper and just let him. He's got to sit on the high side, he's got to drive the boat, but he's got the view to look up. You see, we came off the line there and we hadn't quite gotten in that mode yet. We had the main quite over trimmed. You see the top is quite closed and stalled. And by contrast in the middle, these guys were quite under trimmed, so they're giving away some power. And on the far right, you see a great example. That's our good buddy Scott Kaufman, longtime Etchells sailor. He's got really good trim. He's got the traveler just right. He's got the sheet just perfect. His crew's in a nice spot, hiking low, and they were super fast off the line in this race. And I want to say they won this race. So just a tip for everybody: when the crew can't see the main, just give it to the skipper, because it's usually pretty light air, and the crew can handle the traveler and the backstay and the ram, but it's okay for the skipper to just drive. And it's also super important to have really solid, repeatable marks on the main sheet, so that when the boat's going well, you can look down and reference that. You look up, telltale's just flying or just stalled, the boat's going well, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm at the red mark, I'm at the number 2 mark or the number 3, however you have it on your boat. So that if the wind stays the same, you go downwind, you come back around that bottom mark, and you turn to go back upwind, you've got super accurate, repeatable settings. Can't emphasize that enough.
And off the line and on the main sheet too, right? So you don't end up in the position like you're in down here.
Right.
And marks on the ram and the traveler. I mean, you really can't mark the boats up enough, right? Every single thing that moves should be easily get back to where you were.
Exactly.
And some of the best ways to do that are in the boat park. If you're not a little curious about how to create a metric for a certain tool, just looking at some of the other top teams. Oh, how did they do it? I've learned some pretty neat things just walking around and checking things like that out in all the classes, really.
Whether it's with a magic marker, or maybe you have a little scale, a little line that makes a gauge, a mast bend gauge or a mast butt gauge or jib cars or something like that. But the backstay and the main sheet and the traveler, super important.
Yeah. Another good thing about this shot is I think the crews are doing a really good job of trying to stay out of the slot. It's pretty easy to have somebody stuck right in that slot trying to go upwind. And I thought these are all 3 pretty good teams, and they're all trying to bend their bodies out of the way of the slot. That was pretty neat. All right. So Eric, this is our Mal jib. It's become quite popular in the last few years. Pretty versatile sail too, right?
Yeah, yeah. We'd say it's our best-selling jib by quite a bit. Um, we can all kind of read that there. It's a minimum weight jib that the class has decided, it's can't be any less than 270 grams per square meter. And it goes through the range pretty nicely. I think that's why it's had so much success, is it doesn't really have a weak spot. It takes the in-hauling very well. It takes a saggy head stay when it's flatter water, and you can take that in light air. But it also handles a tighter forestay when the wind comes up and you're hiking hard, and there's just everybody is, it's kind of the default jib. Really nice sail, really smooth, has a nice groove to steer to in all conditions. So that's probably, if you sail in a light medium place, that should be the first sail you're looking at on the inventory list for head sails.
Yeah, that's your workhorse, right? And the 0
Yeah.
to 14 is a pretty big range, That's pretty impressive that it can go through that range and still be a great sail from 0
Yeah.
to 14. So maybe Eric explained a little bit, like, what can you do to this sail when you're at the bottom end of the range versus when you're at the top end of the range? And what battens come with this sail, and when do you try to switch them in and out?
Yeah, it's got 3 battens for the top full batten, has a really light, wider, flexible one for really light air. And then there's an AP batten as well. That's a little thinner, but it's a little stiffer. I think it's a 10-120. And then there's a stiffer one that goes in the head if a breeze starts coming in and you get caught with it up, or just if the sail's a little older, if you want to, you're using the sail a little longer and the head is getting a little deep, you can put that in. And then it comes with stiffer battens in the bottom too. They're shorter and longer. So and when the sail's fresh and you're sailing with light air, you put the shorter ones in the bottom 2 pockets. And then when the breeze comes up or the sail gets a little older, a little rounder in the back, you switch to the longer ones. It's the full length of the pocket. So it really dramatically changes the shape of the sail. So depending on the conditions, you want to make sure you've got those spare battens on board with you. It's easy, you can switch them downwind too. It happens a lot in San Diego. You start a little early, the breeze is filling, you're looking for power, you want to make the jib full so you can have some power, and you get to the top mark and it starts getting a little bit windier. Maybe, it goes from 8 knots to 12 knots. It's pretty easy to switch those battens downwind, and then you're set for the next beat and probably the next day, or vice versa. At the end of the day, if it starts to get a little lighter on the last beat, if we've done 3 races, it can get a little lighter. You can swap those on the run. It's not that hard to do, and it really helps keep the sail in its range.
Yeah. So a lot of small things can all add up to make a much bigger difference, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah. We had a question about that, maybe the last pictures. I think a few people have questions about traveler height. Let me see if I can go back to that. To that picture. And yeah, the boom is fairly high, and that's a pretty common thing you see in these Etchells regattas these days. What are your thoughts about that, Eric? Is it just about balancing the boat? Are you trying to put a certain batten on the center line, or how do you navigate that?
In general, the leeward side of the boom is going to be at least on center line, if not a boom width above, or maybe a little more. You can see on the boat on the right where he's got the traveler quite high, but he's got the sheet eased just a little bit. That picture's not quite on center line as much as the middle one or the bottom one, the most left picture. That picture is straight on center line. The backstay's lined up almost perfectly with the mast. And you see we might have the traveler just a little low. The leeward side of the boom is right on center line. Because we're sheeted so hard, we're over trimmed. If we ease the main sheet a bit to open up the top, the boom's going to go to leeward. So we're going to have to pull the traveler up, like probably at least 6 inches, maybe 8 inches, maybe a little bit more, and you can see the boat in the middle his boom, his sheet is quite ease, and his traveler is getting close to the top of the track, which is pretty common too. But he could trim in just a little bit. Remember, if the traveler gets too high and the boom is cranked around and the back of the sail is to weather too much, it's more drag. It helps give you power. It helps give you helm. The boat feels pretty good, but it might be a little bit too draggy. And as flat as the water there is, you probably don't want that. If the waves come up a little more and you say, well, even more twist, the traveler will be even a little bit higher. But we're definitely always going to have the leeward side of the boom at least on center line, if not, a boom width or 2 boom widths above that. It's a balance between the sheet tension and the traveler height.
I think there's a bit of a aspect of the weather sheeting as well, right? When we start weather sheeting the jib on the track, at least, then the exit of the jib puts closer to the main. So trying to pull the main away from the exit of the jib is also a good thing too, right?
Yeah. I mean, probably in this condition, we'll talk a little bit about in-hauling in a bit, but when it gets light like this, the in-haul starts to go back out a little bit, because the boat is just sailing a wider angle in general, right? If we're all on the rail, if we look at our tuning guide, where the base setting is about 8 to 10 knots, and that's generally everybody is just hiking. Everybody's on the high side. Everybody's hiking. We have the in-hauler about 60 millimeters in from the edge of the cuddy cabin, because that's kind of like a high pointing mode. The boat's sailing almost as high as it can, and there's enough wind that it gets between the slot between the main and the jib, but it doesn't start backwinding the main too much. So when it's lighter, like it is right there, we move the lead outboard a little bit.
Right.
Okay. We try, and if you look at the picture on the left, we see how nice and straight the exit of the jib is and how open the slot is, because it's light there. Look, I'm hiking out to leeward. So there we're more like 40 mils or maybe 20 mils inside. And to be honest with you, at times when we were both hiking low, we had the lead pretty far outboard, almost back to where the original tracks are, outside the cuddy cabin, because it's just so light. And remember, when we do that, we got to sag the head stay more if we got a mal jib. It helps power it up, because it kind of makes sense, right? If we move the lead out, that's why we ended up with in-hauling in a different jib, right? Because we figured out the angle is, the sheeting angle is quite wide out on the deck. It was something like 12 or 14 degrees. So that's why we used to, in the old days, we sagged the head stay tremendously, because we got the front of the jib lined up with the back of the jib. So the guys, Ian Murray and GT and the boys, figured out, well, why don't we pull the back end up? Why don't we make the boat point a little higher? Well, when you move the back of the jib up, well, you got to move the front of the jib up too. You got to tighten the forestay a little bit. So we do that to help the boat point a little higher, go a little better, but we got to be careful that we're not slowing the boat down too much. And then once it gets kind of breezy and we're up, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 steps, then they're starting to close the slot down too much and backwind the main, then we got to start going back outboard a little bit with the jib lead. And I don't think a lot of people have a really firm grasp of exactly when to do that, because it takes quite a bit of time. You got to sail your boat, and the wave state has a big thing to do with it too. If you're kind of in that medium wind, we get a lot of that in San Diego, medium wind and kind of nasty chop, and we want to go upwind, but it's not really about pointing. It's about keeping the boat going through the water. So we're sailing a little bit fatter on the telltales. We're making sure we're never inside. We're never stalling the inside of the telltales. When we're sailing like that, if we feel slow, the first thing we do, move the jib lead outboard a little bit. It just helps, because that's the angle the boat is sailing. In light air, it happens anyway. The angles get wider, and we need to move the lead outboard. So in that picture, everybody's a little bit outboard.
Yep. All right. We talked about the Mal LM6R. This is another jib that's done pretty well. We were just talking about how on Craig Menzies' boat had just finished 3rd in the Bacardi series over the winter, right? But there's a few differences, huh? You got to have a little bit of a firmer forestay at times, right?
Yeah. This sails a pretty nice sail as well. Very smooth. It's made out of a little stiffer cloth. It's also minimum weight. It's a Dimension 284 Pro Radial. It's a little bit of a different animal in that it's fuller, and it's very easy to make this sail too full by sagging the forestay too much. The thing I like about this sail is that you in the bump, you can sail with a tighter forestay, and it requires a little bit less attention. We actually had to develop a technique of sailing the boat and changing the trim on really light, flat days in Miami. We'd be sailing along, we'd racing, and then here comes a big set of waves from a coach boat or a powerboat chop or something like that. And you hit these waves, and the forestay just bounces all over the place. So in order to counteract that and not just knock all the wind out of the jib, we would pull the ram on. And when we pull the ram on, we pull it aft. Ours automatically goes forward with bungees. So on the Barney post, I'd have to pull the ram aft. I'd have a mark where it's at. I'd pull it aft, which straightens the mast and straightens the forestay. But when I did that at the same time, I had to ease the main sheet. So we get through the waves, smash, smash, smash. The forestay's a little tighter, and then we start rolling along again. Then I got to ease the ram back off, pull the main sheet back on. It's a big gainer because these boats, they need a lot of power. They got a lot of wetted surface. When they slow down, they take a long time to reaccelerate. And I liked with this sail, we use this sail a bit in light air too, and we didn't really have to do that. The forestay was a little bit firmer. It didn't bounce, didn't over bounce when we hit the big waves. The waves are still painful all the time, right? I mean, we hate that, but that's where this sail has a nice sweet spot, when it's bumpy, and you can keep the forestay a little bit firmer, which is really nice.
Yeah, playing that ram is a really powerful tool, right? So you control a lot of things with that. You can control the mainsail leach, the head stay sag, the mast bend. It controls a lot of things. It's like it's a good in a lot of ways, right? So having really good settings for knowing where that thing was living when you were happy, and where you would pull it to when you're going through that set of waves, and then back to the original spot once the sea state settled down. So what do you think the range was? If obviously you're looking at some kind of metric guide on the boat that you were using, and also looking at the sails, I would imagine. But could you quantify it and how much the mast moves in the partners?
It's probably
like a finger,
half to 3/4 of an inch. Enough that I could see the head stay get tighter.
Right, about a width of a finger, maybe, or something like that.
About an inch. I'd pull it back, so that it would firm up the forestay enough and ease the main sheet, and then we would get in that lighter, really light, flat water. Then we'd send it back forward at the collar to sag the forestay when we were using the mow, but not so much with this sail.
Right. All right. What do we have next here? The GT, probably not something you see used all that often in San Diego, I would imagine.
Yeah, this is our medium heavy air sail, and we just wanted to make everybody aware that kind of the models we have. It's a heavier, beefier sail. Yeah, don't sell too many of them in San Diego, and we probably only use this sail, 4 or 5 races this winter in Miami. Excuse me.
Yeah, I used this thing at the Worlds in Corpus and was pretty impressed. It actually went downrange a little bit better than I thought it would. It's pretty nice sail, actually.
Years ago, when I remember when Billy Hardesty was racing a lot in Miami, he loved this sail, and he put it up as soon as he could, and sometimes he'd have it up in 12, 13, 14 knots of wind, and he said if he got caught, and he wasn't really that worried. But if it was me a building breeze, he was seriously happy with this. And it's a nice smooth sail, but little, I don't know if you need it in your inventory in San Diego.
Right. Yep. All right, we got a new one coming.
Yeah, this is we've been testing this sail a bit. The guys who actually came up with this idea of having it was Vince Brune, when he was working a lot with Tom Carruthers. It's basically a beefed up Mal. It's the same design as the Mal, except it's built a step up in weight on the cloth. It's got stronger patches and reinforcement, big radial head patch at the top. It's a bit like, probably 8 or 10 years ago, the inventory in San Diego, you had LM2 light, you had LM2H, and to be honest, if you push the mal uprange, too many times, 4 or 5 days, it really starts to slow down considerably. So this sail is something that really, when you're max hiked, you look up the race course and you go, God, this beat, we're going to be max hiked the entire time. We're going to be up a step or two on the rig, and this sail is really going to be nice. It's going to save your mal for the lighter conditions. So you probably have, just thinking ahead this weekend, we're probably going to start with a mal or an LM6R for the first race, and we'll see how the forecast is. And if it builds, above 12 knots, if it's going to be 12, 13, 14 knots for the second race, we would switch to this jib. Although actually we don't have one yet, but that's what I would do if I had one. But that's kind of the story. And then you might use that the rest of the day and even the last race. And the nice thing about these sails is if you have the last race of the day or on the third race, and then on the run, suddenly it's getting light. It's like, oh man, it's going to be light at the top. The sail is still the shape of the mal. Maybe you would switch to the softer battens, and then you basically have your mal jib for the last beat. If it's an upwind finish, and you're not going to be totally caught out, you're going to have a nice, still have a nice versatile sail in that, and it's going to last a lot longer. So I think we just kind of just introduced it. We were really happy with it all winter, and we've decided, what, we're going to start offering this as another sail, as an alternative to the, so because the GT doesn't really quite fit. It's GT is a lot flatter, and it goes up range for a higher wind that we normally see in San Diego. And a lot of times in San Diego, when it's windy, it's so bumpy. It's nice to have the power of the mal in the front of the boat too. So
yeah, I really liked how you described it as like you're looking upwind and we're going to be full hiking, right? So that's not really talking about the wind speed. That's talking about how you're feeling the boat and sailing the boat. And I think that's a really nice, like, kind of organic way of thinking about tuning, sail choices, trimming, things like that, because it might be different for some teams than others. And I that's more of the way that I think about it versus let's pull an anemometer out and actually see what kind of wind speed it is. I don't really know anyone who's going to do that.
Exactly.
But,
and the wind has different densities on different days,
Right.
in different parts of the world. And if you're full hike, you're up a step on the rig, or, 2 steps, and the sails have a nice overlap. So, but that's when you start putting the sail up.
Yep. All right, well, enough about the sails for now. Let's talk about some sailing, huh? So this is Tom Carruthers, right? Pretty light air Miami day.
Yeah, one weekend we didn't have our tuning partners with us, and we teamed up with Tom because we've known him for years. He's been racing the class a long time. He goes pretty fast, and this was a nice picture we had of him set up really nicely. He actually did us a big favor by being our partner that day. On Friday, he was just kicking our butt in light air, and we had the good fortune of having a coach take some nice pictures and photos, and we kind of copied his setup, and we went out the next day and we won the first 2 races in conditions like this, with crew in the boat or hiking low. And this is a really nice picture. You can see we've got the tack of the jib and the clew of the jib almost lined up. You can see he's just inside the cuddy cabin. That's actually quite a bit higher than probably we were sailing, but it's trimmed perfectly at the mark on the spreader. You can see the top telltale is just flowing, really nice. The traveler is about 6 or 8 inches up. It's not excessively high, and he's got the boom is probably, the low side of the boom is probably about 1 boom width above the center line of the boat. If we took a picture from the back, it looks like maybe Jeff's doing a little rig adjustment there. But the main doesn't look over trimmed. If you get the pictures if you get fortunate enough to have someone take pictures, it's nice to have them line up the tack and the clew of the jib, and then look where the leech of the main intersects the spreaders. And you can see there it's a little bit out, so he's not over trimmed. You know, the boat's nice and flat. He's got just enough helm, it looks like, to keep the boat tracking nicely. So that was a nice example of really good sail trim.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. You talk about the helm. You know, I think that's such an important thing of a conversation to have between the driver and the main trimmer. How much helm is actually in the boat? Is the boat easy to drive, hard to drive? Could you take more helm? Do you need less helm? How do y'all manage that on your boat, Eric? Do y'all try to quantify the amount of helm, or do you talk about it much? Or
Constantly.
Yeah.
Constantly. When we first start going upwind, it's the biggest factor. I'm always like, John, how does it feel? How does this feel? Or if I'm sitting with Rick Merriman, Rick's really good at starting. It was John's first year in an Etchells, so he was, you know, kind of learning his way. When I sail with Rick and we're really hiking, he'll just be like, too much or too little, or, you know, I need more power. And I kind of hike out. I trim the main on the boat, and I have the Traveler in my hand all the time when I'm hiking. It's too late if the skipper says, oh, I've got too much helm, and you got to come in a little bit, and then you reach down and you find the Traveler line, and then you uncleat it, and then you ease it. It's probably too late. In fact, it's hard for me to drive the boat myself and not have the Traveler in my hand, because I'm kind of very particular about how much helm I have. So I usually have it in my hand, and just as the helm's loading, I'm easing that thing pretty quickly, because I like to have just a little bit of helm. Like you're pulling on the tiller, and there's maybe 3 or 4 pounds of pressure there. And I want to keep that all the time. I don't want it to go away unless I'm bearing away and I'm trying to go through some waves, but constantly talking about that and figuring out just enough to keep the boat going. If it goes away too much, the bow wanders too much, it's hard to drive the boat, and the boats are already hard enough to drive. You know, you're not going to be perfect all the time. We get a lot of slop in San Diego at times. You know, you come around the bottom mark and you're going back upwind. The whole fleet has been coming downwind and you're in the middle of it. That's why a lot of times you see the lead boats extend, because they'll round the mark and they can go straight for, you know, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and they get away from all that slop. They can just get out in the open water and they get into a bit of rhythm in the waves, where especially in San Diego, a lot of times you have the southerly swell in the westerly breeze. You're on port tack. It's a little bit from the side, and the boat goes, you know, up the wave, where it kind of loads up the helm, and then it goes down the wave and it unloads, and the back telltale on the jib stalls. And you just kind of want to let the boat go straight in that condition. And there you can't chase the helm too much with a sail trim. You got to sail with a lot more twist, because if you think about, I say this all the time when I'm in, so if you think about that port tack in San Diego, when the boat's going through a massive amount of heel, it's probably changing heel 20 degrees from the top of the swell to the bottom of the swell, and how much that's rocking the mast and the top of the mast, and how much huge amount of angle apparent wind is going through. So if you try to trim too hard in that, you're going to be stalled all the time. But if you have nice twist, and this is an occasion where you pull the Traveler higher, you know, it'll be, if you look at that picture with Tom, it'll probably be, you know, another 8 inches up, but the sheet will be eased. And what that does is the top of the main is less wrong most of the time, is the way I like to put it. It'll have a chance to keep the flow, you know, 30-40% of the time or something like that. Whereas if you trim it really hard, you're going to have so much helm, but it's going to be at the top, at the bottom of the wave. When you're coming up, you're going to have so much helm, and then when you go to the other side, it's going to be unloaded, but it'll never flow. It's just going to be stalled all the time. So yeah, it's tough.
Twist is forgiving, right?
Yep. And then on starboard tack, it's usually more into, a lot of times it's more into the swell. You're going straight on into it, so you can sheet a little harder and have a little more swell, a little more helm to get through, more power to get through the chop.
Oh, so you're setting things up asymmetrically with the Traveler. Are you doing the same thing with the in-hauling?
No, I've
No?
never really
Leaving
done
those the
that
same
with
or the
in-haul.
leads?
Yeah, you might not sheet as hard on
Right.
port, but I usually
Right.
leave the in-haulers alone just because there's already enough going
Too many
on.
things moving
I
around,
try,
right? You gotta,
I try
you gotta
and keep it
simplify it
simple.
a little bit.
Not
Yeah.
quite that
Yeah.
smart. I remember in the
Need
old
it.
days, the guys in the Bahamas, it was really incredibly different tack to tack, and they would tune their whole boats different, and it just kind of freaked me out. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna try
Need
and
a
just
whole
make the
nother,
boat go straight.
a whole nother arm,
Yeah,
move all those things around at once. That's
right.
something that, when I'm driving any kind of boat or other people that I know that are great drivers, they're always trying to isolate one or two variables so that they can focus on one or two.
Exactly.
So like, because you can't get to all of them fast enough, end up
No.
just chasing yourself around in circles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So pick one or two that you think are the most important and try to isolate the other ones. Right. A lot
Yeah.
of different ways to skin the cat, essentially.
Right. Right. But like you said, it's all about the helm. It's about the
Right.
helm, keeping that
Yeah.
helm constant, trying to keep the heel angle and we were just doing some coaching with the under 30 kids at the Star Bacardi Cup, and it's there's only really two things going on in my mind when you go upwind. You're either trying to get power, you're trying to develop power, so you get enough helm so you can drive the boat straight, you're getting the heel right, and then once you get that power, you can hold it. And there are occasions in San Diego where you're just kind of relaxed sitting on the rail, but very quickly the boat gets overpowered and we're trying to bleed power off. We're either trying to make the sails full or we're trying to make the sails fat. We're trying to power up or we're trying to depower. San Diego is a unique place. There's the longest periods of time of any venue I've ever sailed in where you're all just kind of sitting on the rail and the boat is just fully powered, and maybe a couple times little puffs comes through and you all kind of lead out a little bit and then you lean right back in and you're just sitting there. It's very unique, and it's really nice. And everybody for the helmsman and everybody.
You're getting me excited about it, Eric. Come on.
Campaign say it'll probably be friggin' 3 knots this weekend.
Oh man,
no, it's
but
not like
to just bring it back to the helm thing, I feel like, if I jump on with a new team, on any kind of boat, that conversation just doesn't happen enough. And the only way to get better at it is to start the conversation so that the crew and the skipper can start to learn from each other and understand each other and create a vocabulary that allows the strength there to grow of understanding how much helm is too much or too little and what's the best way to change it. Right.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
I mean, I'm asking, no matter what boat I'm on, I'm asking the driver constantly, how much helm do you have?
Yeah.
And the driver has to have a good response, right? They have to know, like, well, it's okay. It's okay.
Ideally,
I want to know, like, can you take a little more? Is it easy to drive the boat? Is it hard to drive the boat? Like, does it feel balanced or does it feel out of whack?
Yeah. For the main trimmers out there, it is good to prompt that all the time, but it's even better if the skipper drives that. Like my buddy John, he's great. He sails stars and fins and has done all this stuff himself for all the years. And I think it's best on the Etchells, you have help, and it's best for the skipper, the helmsman, to be on the speed team, right? You kind of have a speed team and you got a tactical team, right? The guys in the front. And if I'm trimming the main, I love the skipper to basically tell me how to trim, so I can get my head out of the boat and look around and make sure we're going the right way. And all I have to do is look at the compass and the other boat and look up the track. And he's saying, hey, I need more power. That's awesome. That's great. He says, ease, ease too, flatten us out, depower. Like I said, it's either, you're either too flat or too heeled. So when the helmsman out there, if you can direct your trimmers, it's really helpful to them. It really is. The helmsman, in my opinion, he should be running the speed team. When he needs to press on and needs some ease on the jib, he's got the best view looking through that leech window up in the main by the spreader, where the jib is on the spreader, and he can see the clue and he knows kind of a reference. And when he can go a little higher and he can call for a little trim, and he's directing us how to trim the sails. That last, 2-3% that gives us that little extra edge, and he doesn't look around, and he doesn't, second guess things like that. When the helmsman can do that, I think it's a lot better. It's a lot faster. There's not a lot of guys in the world that can do everything on an Etchells well enough to win themselves. And what I mean is drive the boat, trim the sails, call the tactics, direct the crew work. There are a few guys like that have sailed for years, Dennis Conner or Vince Broom. I mean, it's an elite squad, right? I don't think any of us are in that. So I encourage everybody to division of labor,
for sure. And the level keeps growing that way too, because everybody gets better on every aspect of it.
Yeah.
All right. Mast spin and forestay sag. This is a big thing on the Etchells, right? You got a lot of different ways to control the mast bend. You want to bend it low, bend it high, straighten it either side. There's a lot of things going on. Eric, why don't you we talked about the mast butt position a little bit, right? Like you only go through 5 mil either side, so a 10 mil swing total, I guess, from your little sweet spot, which is pretty darn close to the tuning guide number, right? As we said, every boat and every mast is a little bit different. But certainly, if you're seeing your mast overbend a lot, whether it's down low or especially up high when the backstay is causing the overbend wrinkles as they point towards the spreaders, moving the mast butt forward essentially just stiffens the whole thing, right?
Yeah. I think we have a not a huge range of conditions in San Diego. I remember years ago, some really good guys racing Etchells, and they basically never moved their mast butt or rake. And they were pretty much, 75, 80% of the time, they were all the way at the back end of the partners. And they had remarkable success like that. Everybody's getting a little more sophisticated. It's a little nicer now with the mast ram. So you can still get away with a little bit less mast butt movement in San Diego. We tend to sail a little bit more lighter conditions, and we got to remember how. This is just a little reminder for, not everybody got to do the whole series in Miami. A little reminder of the things that we're looking for, that it all works together. The mast butt forward stiffens the mast. If you get caught with a little forward, you can put a little push on at the deck to get more bend. If the breeze comes up, you can pull it back, and that helps stiffen the mast. Remember, if you push the mast forward, you're gonna sag the forestay more, so you might need a little bit of backstay just to bend the mast and to get to tighten the forestay just a touch. And when you do that, you have to trim the main sheet just a little bit. This goes back to these marks where we are. And then, now we're starting to, the spreaders are going to be, it's got more adjustment in it. This isn't something you do during the regatta, but just remember, if we have a little bit more sweep, if we feel like our main is always a little full in the middle, when we pull the backstay on, the mast tends to overbend in the top first, because we've got control down low with the mast butt and the puller and the pusher. It should bend very evenly, and it's usually better if the overbend wrinkles start just above the spreader window, kind of in the middle. And if they don't, then if you have like this whale spar, I think we have 15 or 18 mils of spreader sweep. Years ago, apparently the spreaders were just sloppy in the Etchells mast. And then someone said, well, let's put 2 pins in there. And I remember guys putting epoxy in there and making the spreaders just plumb straight out to the side, and they didn't move. And the guys learned how to race their boats that way. And some guys had to take some luff curve out of the main because the mains were always too full. And then people started thinking, hey, what if we, you get a little range in these spreaders and get them to sweep a little bit, and it's really nice, the new spreader brackets, because they also move forward. We'll talk about that a little bit.
Yep.
So this, and another thing that is affecting the mast bend is the rake. Like I talked about, We kind of have kind of a standard rake setting for, say, 7 to 17 knots, majority of what we sail in. We know it's going to be windier than that, we'll take some rake out. If we know it's going to be lighter, it's real light, crewing the boat all day, we'll put more rake in. Helps sag the forestay, it helps bend the mast, because in those conditions we need some mast bend because the main is too full. And the other thing, which we don't do all that often, but if we do get an extreme day, sometimes in the spring, some big wind comes up and we might see 18, 20, 22 knots there. And that's when we actually may jump the shrouds a little bit. I think it's be a fun day in San Diego, we can do that, but it's all on the tuning guide. And what we basically are doing, we're pulling the shrouds aft on the chain plates, and that is effectively moving the spreaders forward, which allows you to pull the backstay really tight and get that tighter forestay. That's what we're trying to do.
It's not all that different from moving the butt itself, right? Honestly.
Yep.
It's kind of the same thing, just a little bit more exaggerated, and you're changing the angle at which you're pulling at a little bit more.
Yeah,
what the lowers are, right? Yeah.
The butt has more of an effect on the bottom of the mast. The lower, like say from the lower quarter, third to quarter, the spreaders affect the middle of the mast, the jumping the shrouds, the middle of the mast, and then above the hounds is all the backstay. So we got to just pay attention to where the overbend wrinkles start happening, and if we need to do something with our spreaders or jump our shrouds.
Right.
And again, I like to look at it or how the boat feels. People say, "Oh, when do you jump them back?" I say, "Well, when I got too much overbend, when I've got too much forestay sag." Well, when is that? I'm probably up, probably 3 or 4 steps, or at least on the shrouds before I start thinking of jumping it. This isn't a 10 or a 12 or even a 14 knot, 15 knot thing. This is up the range. Like I said, not something we got to focus on in San Diego, but we get some pretty breezy days down in Miami at times and parts of the country.
So how often have you actually changed them on the water? I think I've only done it like 2 times. Usually it's like super windy at the dock and I'm setting it up at the dock. I mean,
I never have.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
On a
pretty
race,
easy to drop a pin or something out there.
On a race, I've never done it on a race day.
Out on the water. Yeah.
There are some people who do it, but you got to be pretty comfortable with it. And it's like you said, the mast butt has a huge effect, and we might go even more extreme on the mast, but we might move it 10 or 15 minutes forward and just hang on and pull the backstay on hard.
Yep. Because the ram starts to have more of an effect on the rig the further forward the mast butt gets, right? Essentially, you can pull more ram on. All right. What's next? All right. So we talked a lot about the mast bend, and now we got some good pictures about how it affects how the ram and how the mast bend affects head state sag or tension and depth down low. You can see the wrinkles, how far back they go. I'm a big fan of paying attention to the wrinkles. You can see they go a little bit further back on 1504, not quite as far back on 1427, or on 1504, they're pretty much into the clue patch. That's pretty extreme. And you can see that the head stays sagging a little bit more. And this is another good shot, I think, because, you have the mal here with a little bit more head stay sag, as we were talking about. And you got the LM6R with a little bit of a firmer head stay, right? Probably just a little bit more ram engaged here is probably the only difference.
Ram half.
Yes. Yep. Ram pulling the mast half. And I thought that was a really good side by side, scrolling through the pictures and, focusing on the wrinkles here, right? Those overbend wrinkles are happening from the ram.
Yeah. This is a great example of the difference of how you set the boat up between the mal and the LM6R. You can see the boat on the left. That's Jim Cunningham. He's got the mal. He's it looks like maybe they probably just got a puff or something, because that looks like Steve in the middle, just sitting on the high side. But they're set up for some pretty light air. There's a really nice amount of forestay sag, and in that light condition, we got to remember there's not enough force on the main to start stretching the cloth at all. So the sail is actually too full, right? It's a Dacron sail. It's not made out of carbon. It stretches, it moves around. So when it's really light, we're trying to flatten the main, right? Because we want that top telltale flowing without, just easing the sheet so far that it just all goes away. So we're trying to make the sail flatter. So we're bending the mast at the deck. We can see those overbend wrinkles like Jackson was talking about. They're coming out of just above the mast ring for the spinnaker. They're going through the main windows, and they got to come at least to the windows. You can see on the boat on the right, you can see those wrinkles coming through the windows. In that picture, I think these were taken on the same day, and we were both really fast with the different setups. The LM6, you can see the forestay is pretty firm, and we're in the boat. I'm actually hiking on the low side because Big John, he's a little bigger than Jim. But we can just see the overbend wrinkles coming through the back
like
of our windows.
75% way back. I think that was a pretty good rule of thumb when we first started using the in-haulers, and now people seem to be going a little bit more than that.
And people ask me all the time, well, how much ram did you have on? What was the gap behind your?
Yeah. Where was the wrinkle?
To the back. Well, no, they don't look at it that way. They ask me how much gap was between your mast and the back of your partners, with the mast collar. And I say, well, that all depends on where my mast butt was,
Right.
or where the collar is on your boat. Not all these boats are the same. So like Jackson said, look at the sail, look at the wrinkles. Somebody might have half an inch. Somebody might have their mast butt all the way aft, or the collar is a little further forward. And then they might be, only have a quarter inch or just almost touching it. Or other guys might have the mast butt way forward, and there's 2 inches of gap. But if you get those overbend wrinkles just right, and on 1427 there too, we had just a little bit of backstay engaged, just enough to help bend the tip enough that we can keep the top of the head of the sail from getting too full, and we can keep that telltale flying, almost all the time. That's it. So they all just got to remember, they all work together. It's not, how much backstay do I use in 4 knots? Well, depends on what your main looks like. We'd like the main to be flowing and open. So just look at if you're just starting out, you got a new boat, start at the tuning guide, write everything down, and then write down after every race what seemed to work and what didn't, and what the conditions were, and slowly work on your mast from there. We got this boat, and we just said, hey, Ben's is pretty freaking successful with this boat. Why don't we just, sail with the way it was? And it was breezy days, and like, holy moly, we are fast. I think the first day we raced this boat, it was 12 to 16 knots. And after the first day, we were winning the regatta. John's first day ever racing in Etchells. And it was like, wow, that's pretty good. But then it got lighter the next day, and it really struggled. And we were like, oh, we're not really going that well. And, we slowly learned that the mast butt was too far forward, and we had a little bit, the rake was far forward for the light stuff. And we learned that. And then by the end of the season, we felt, we did all 4 regattas, and we did a bunch of training days in between. And we got our matrix going and figured out what we like on this mast, and how we're, I think we're in the ballpark in all conditions now. So it takes some time, but
definitely takes time.
Everybody
like
out
you
there,
said,
don't be afraid.
All the boats are different.
Yeah.
Masts are different, boats are different,
Right.
And that's not all. I mean, some of them are more alike than others, but every now and then you get on one that's just quite a bit different, and that takes a little bit of figuring out. It takes time. It takes a few science projects, a lot of sailing, a lot of feel, and
some tears
a lot of experience. Definitely some tears at times. How'd you know about that, Eric? Damn.
I saw you crying out there.
Oh God. All right. Enough of that. Let's see what's next here. Yeah. Okay. We talked about the ram correlation to the mainsail leech tension too. Like you said, you're going to tighten the ram a little bit to firm up the head stay to get through some bad chop, but you have to ease the main sheet, because as you stand the mast more up, the leech gets tighter, right? Yeah. I think that's worth pointing out again, honestly. The ram has an effect on all the things. It's pretty important, cool tool. A lot cooler than trying to kick those blocks out back in
Oh
the day.
God, thank God. We've got that
Golly.
one.
All right, downwind. We got 2 kites. Been around. I guess the VMG3 is probably a little newer than the FR2, but been around for a while now, 2 years at least, maybe 3. And Eric, you're the cloth expert. I'll let you start about why
Yeah.
did we choose AirX, I guess, I think is an important thing. Some people like to use Supercoat, but also I think it's important for us to talk a little bit about how this again is not a wind speed thing necessarily when you switch between the two. It could have to do with the fleet size, larger fleet, you might have to be sailing around all the different angles a little bit more. You might be in the VMG a little bit larger window versus the runner, right? A smaller fleet, you'll probably could widen the runner window a little bit more, right? Because you have less bad air, less waves and stuff. But tell us what you think.
Yeah, you're allowed. Well, we all know we're allowed to measure in 2 kites. The minimum weight AirX 500 just meets that, which is really nice. It's super popular in North America. I don't know why we tend to be a lot more into super light than we are AirX than the European counterparts who like the super light or super coat. I guess because we sail in a bit more flatter water. Very popular. I know the Etchells fleet in Sydney. They race on the heads and outside sometimes where they get a lot of bumpy conditions, and there's a lot of ferry traffic and all kinds of stuff going on. And a lot of those guys prefer the super light. A few of the Europeans do, but and it's possible to get those sails.
Yeah.
And there's probably a day or two, every now and then where it's a good idea to try that out. But like I said, we probably sell 98% AirX out of AirX 500, and the FR2, once we've squared the pole back, at least 3 feet aft for the forestay, it's a really great sail. Generally, if we go out before the start and we're kind of like in between and we're like, oh, do we put up the VMG or do we put up the runner? And we're with our tuning buddy and there's 6, 7, 8 knots of breeze, and he's got a VMG and you've got a full runner, you're probably going to go a little faster than him. You're going to go the same speed and maybe a little bit lower. And then it comes race time and you round to the top mark, you're in like 6th or 8th and you got your runner up and you're like in this big battle and fight. And you might, unless you can keep clear air the whole time and not
flat water.
And flatter water, you're probably you might struggle a little bit. The VMG is basically the same sail, but it's smaller. It's got narrower shoulders. So it opens the leeches a little bit more, and it's in those conditions where you're doing a lot of angle changes and jibing and accelerating. A lot of times that's a faster racing sail. And that for sure, if you got the pole on the head stay, or it's just off the head stay or back maybe 2-3 feet, you want to have the sail up. A lot of guys have a lot of success with it squared back. The sails have a really nice overlap, but I'd say if the breeze is dying, you're going to default to the VMG3. If it's going to be, squared back the whole time, we're hiking, we're up a step on the rig or 2 steps, pretty happy with the full runner, so that's how I look at it and seem to have been pretty happy with that.
I think one good thing to take away from this though is that it's not really about the wind speed. It's could very much be about the fleet size and how much wake is getting pushed around by those boats, or coach boat fleet size, honestly, in Miami these days. Good Lord. I mean, it could throw a lot of wave state at you, and you're going to have to, that's what I've found out over the last few years is when in doubt, the VMG3 was better in Miami. Now that might not be the case in San Diego, but it's just another way to think about it and look at it and think about it. I think
absolutely
worth bringing up. All right. So this is a pretty nice shot of how much frack is going on these boats, and Mast is all the way forward and pulled as hard as you literally can, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's right.
certainly for me, I think even you're pulling it as hard as you can, right, Eric?
Yeah. This is something that we learned last year. A lot of teams were more aggressive with that downwind when we were training for Miami for the Worlds. I think the spreaders, there's a rule on the spreaders in the Etchells, and I think they're allowed to move like 50 mil aft and 75 forward or something like that. And it's pretty important that they move forward because it does a lot of good things, and it helps the mast invert like that. If they're set plumb or epoxied in, or you got two bolts holding it, it's not going to let the mast invert that much. And so that's Tom Carruthers to weather. So he's got some nice bend. That's us in 1427. And I do the bow on the boat. And we have the boat rigged where we hook the jib halyard up to a fraculator and I pull it tight with just on a 1-to-1 setup. And then we have what's called a super frac rigged. And that's like, I think it's
right?
5 or 6 to 1. And it's rigged on the center of the foredeck just behind the mast. And I stand there with two hands in my legs and I pull on that thing physically as hard as I can. I pull it till I can't pull any harder. The backstay's got to be all the way off to get that kind of inversion. Like, I am not afraid. I pull it. If I don't pull as hard as I can, Ed's yelling at me. Bend the mast hard. Get the mast inverted. I'm like, all right. He gets pictures. It's not bent enough. That's why you guys were slow. Didn't I tell you to do that? Yeah. Okay. You're right. So that's, and it gets the spinnaker further forward, and it gets the spreaders forward, and having the spreaders rock too is important. And when I do that, like, the upper shrouds are loose. They are literally have no load on them when we go upwind. They're slack. So they don't get into the main at all. And you look up and you go, it's really not that big a deal. It's just, it's kind of touching the main a little. But these boats are all so even that the little things like that are really important. It's a nice picture there too. You can see right through our pole, the clues are exactly even. Tom's got the oar. You got to be like Tom with the weather, the one on the pole just slightly lower than the clue. It's letting it ride up and open the leech a little bit. Those are two well set up boats going downwind right there. But try and get that mast inversion. We all don't have the luxury of having a coach, but go downwind with your training partner or somebody before the start. Yell over, hey, does it look like our mast is bending forward? Or have the front person. Actually,
it should be scary looking, right?
Yeah. It should scare you
Whoa,
if you haven't done it before.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Or the bow person just needs to look up at the mast.
Right.
Do it. Like on the starboat, we have the crew. He stands up all the time. He's always looking at the mast. He calls it how far forward to go. So just make sure your front crew looks up, and that thing is arced forward a good bit. You can see there the tip's probably, a foot and a half, 2 feet forward of the.
It looks like it's
the hounds of the
dead over the
collar.
tip of the cuddy cabin.
Trying to get that thing forward. It's just a lot faster. But and it takes a little bit of coordination when you're trying to defrac. You got to take the super frac off first. And the other thing, remember, people, this is going to change the mark on your boom vang. Okay, when you pull the mast forward like that, it tightens the leech, so you end up easing the boom vang. And you got to call to the skipper and say when the super frac is coming off, because the mast comes way back and then the leech just dumps and you lose all the power in the main. So the vang has to come on. Not so much when it's really light like that, but we do this all the time. We do it in 8, 10, 12, 14 knots. We pull a thing forward. So when the mast comes back, the leech dumps and the vang has to come on. And that's the first thing you get up, right? You get near the bottom mark. It's like, okay, here we go. We're going to get all this stuff down and turn the corner. And we got to get the super frac off. And so that's usually the first thing that goes. And you might be 8 or 10 lengths out fighting for an overlap. So make sure the skipper looks up at the vang and pulls that vang on a little bit and gets that leech of the main working. So it's not just hanging out there doing nothing. One important thing I remember just now. That's super important. I know we're throwing a lot of stuff at you guys tonight, but it's a lot of good stuff. This will come up on, we're recording it, and there'll be a link on YouTube that'll come out in a few days. You'll probably get an email about that. So if you ever want to look it up, we can go over
Yep.
all this stuff again.
Yeah, this will live forever on the internet. But it will take a few days.
Yeah.
All right. So if you feel so inclined, feel free to reach out to any of us here listed here. Especially if you'll be in San Diego this weekend. Both Eric and I will be there sailing together. So please come find us, and we're happy to help. We're there to help. Any questions you have, or even if you want us to come have a quick look at your boat or whatever, I'm happy to do that. I'm sure Eric is too.
Yeah.
And or shoot us a note.
Yeah. Great. I hope everybody enjoyed this, and we got a little bit of something out of it. Not too much.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you all for joining us.
All right. Cool. We'll see you soon, Jackson.